So I want to go around the room again with what keeps you up at night. I know that there are those crises that come your way, and what are those concerns you have for the institution, for the PI? What are those things that keep you up, that people listening should know that this is really quite serious? Maybe we'll go in the other direction. Zev, you can start.
Uh, the, the the only thing that keeps me up at night is when we don't hear about it early enough, so that we can get ahead of things. I mean, we will always know when we're in the midst of a license or something because that's coming through us. But if a PI wants to start a company and they have a very short deadline and they want to get licenses and everything else done, we want to make sure again that we have sufficient time to get it in front of compliance, so they get everything together and so that it can be voted on at the next monthly meeting. So it's really about having, some time, and not months and months and months, but at least, several weeks, uh, so we can get all that information together so that a plan can be put together so that we don't delay the PI's research and plans, right? Our our desire is never to delay anything for you. We don't want to be an implement. We don't want to slow down progress. So that would be the only thing that keeps me up at night, is that we don't have sufficient time or sufficient information to get what you need going through. Um, you know, we ask a lot of questions. We have you fill out sometimes a lot of forms. And for those of I am not a scientist by training, as I like to joke. I like to equate it to when you show up to the doctor's office and they ask you for your family history and they ask you for your insurance and they ask you all those things in advance, which may take you some time because it will speed up when they actually get a chance to meet with you. They will have more knowledge going into it so they can put together a better diagnosis, get the billing correct and everything else. So when we ask you for information, we are doing it to try to speed up the back end. And the earlier we can start that and the more and better information we can get, the easier it'll be as we get to the finish line.
Okay, now from the compliance side. You don't have to tell us the stories, but what are the nightmares that you worry about?
So I think one of the things that's interesting about conflicts is that it's largely about perception, and it's not necessarily that we're actually concerned that our investigators are motivated or unduly biased because of some outside interest, but it's the perception that someone might think that they are. And I think, Flora, you touched on that in your introduction, and that Scarlet C, and being kind of concerned about that. And I'm glad, Zev, that you mentioned, and I fully agree that having a conflict of interest is not a bad thing. But not being transparent about it, not doing anything to mitigate that, that's where you can run into trouble. And I think, the seminal case is that of Jesse Gelsinger over 20 years ago, who was a subject who was on the gene therapy trial and unfortunately did not survive the intervention. And it came out later that there were potential institutional and individual conflicts that had not been disclosed to the family or to the participants, and or in publications and other things. That set gene therapy back 20 years, and it's still a little bit of a black eye for the University of Pennsylvania. Every time there's a discussion about conflicts, that comes up. And so I think my biggest fear is that we would miss something, that we would have a big institutional conflict or an individual conflict that we weren't aware of, or we didn't do anything to mitigate, and that ends up in in ProPublica or the New York Times, and we're making headlines, and it can be really truly damaging to the institution's reputation and to our investigators, and to the faith that the larger community has in the research that we do. And I think having that trust is really of an incredible importance, and it's something that we have to take seriously, and treat with the gravitas that it deserves. And that isn't to say that this should be terrifying things, but I think a little bit of effort goes a long way in protecting our investigators and our institution from that kind of nightmare scenario.
How about you, Janet?
Well, I'm going to echo what both Zev and Patrick said, that I think the biggest issue here that I always worried about, just like Patrick, is that once the horse is out of the barn, you can't put it back in. And so once there's a perception out there, and we saw it, Patrick and I have seen it over many years, that once there's a perception that somebody's in this for financial gain, and that there's nothing you can do, even if it's all wrong. I mean, and it's more so now than ever, given the information environment that we live in. But that, I think, was always the concern. And so I totally agree with what Patrick said. And the one other thing that I would also say is that I think that I want to latch onto something that Zev said and the idea about being proactive. And I think that it's useful for the researcher or the clinician, just for their own planning purposes, to understand the environment that they're operating in from a conflicts perspective. So for instance, if the conflict is going to be such that you're not going to be, because your financial interest or other interests are so significant that you won't be able to be the PI, you're better off knowing that before you start really going down with your research, so that you can ready somebody else to be that PI or make your own decisions about which is more important to you. So I just want to echo that there's nothing more significant than being proactive. And that's, again, if not we anymore, but if they don't know about the conflict, they can't help you prevent this perception issue.
And I'd like to jump in on something that Janet said. As you think about this, think about partnering, right? First of all, compliance is a partner. They're not the police. They're not there to stop you. They're there to be a partner to help you move forward. But one of the other things is when you approach them, think about who the other partners you have academically. Perhaps you can't be the PI on the study. Who do you think you could identify who's not conflicted, that works very well with you, that could be? Or the other one is sometimes consenting patients. So think about, the more you want to take on your own, if you have a conflict, the harder it becomes. But the wider your partnerships and collaborations are, and the more you plan and think about that, the easier it'll be to go forward. So that's, think about not only compliance as a partner, but think about other partners who can help you through this journey who are not conflicted, but that you trust and you can work well with.